guys. Welcome to the next episode of Let's Talk Agile podcast. I am here with Steedan Crowe. Steedan is a product manager with a tremendous amount of experience. When we met, one of the topics that we talked about is how product managers come to life, how they learn, how they develop, and why they should really understand Agile, because there's a trend right now where product managers are becoming a little bit more disconnected from Agile as a discipline. And so Steedan, he is a lecturer. He does a lot of classes. He has a tremendous blog with many articles, publishes frequently across a lot of mediums. Steedan, it's awesome to have you. And I'm looking forward to exploring some of these topics now.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and I think you found me through my Medium, and I have my newsletter, Roadmap Weekly, as well. And it's fun just every week to be able to put your ideas out there and see how they resonate with people.
Yeah, and your ideas are excellent, spot on some of the things. So why don't we just dive into first topics? You do a lot of, classes, and you run your own podcasts and blogs, educating the product management community about things they are really weak about, which is Agile. So first thing, what are you seeing out there? Why is that such a big gap? Why did you decide to contribute?
I wish I had more classes. I have one online course I'm working on, and I've done a couple of podcasts here and there, but you mentioning it now remind me, I really need to get back into podcasting and do that. So I think I started the newsletter because I saw a lot of people asking the same question. So I do coaching. I do a lot of coaching, and everybody I was coaching was running into the same issues. It was consistently a lot of like process related, Agile related issues. And I was getting a little tired of repeating myself, to be honest. And there's a lot of boilerplate that people were missing. And so what I found is a lot of product managers were getting thrown into this role without a lot of experience and without a lot of formal training. And they didn't have a lot of mentorship in their companies, and especially smaller companies. They might be the only product manager. And maybe yesterday they were an engineer and today they're a product manager, and they don't have the background. And so with the newsletter, I wanted to talk about some of these basic things: how to plan a roadmap, what kind of different roadmaps are there? How do you run a sprint? Should you really do retros? Is it worth the time? How do you run a retro? And what I found is it's been a really helpful tool for me in my mentoring and coaching. I can give people these resources off the hop and save a lot of time. And then we can dig into the nitty gritty of, okay, here's this concept. Your company works a little bit differently. It doesn't quite apply the way maybe it's prescribed. How do we adapt? How do we make this work with what you're working with at your company? There's a lot of product managers that aren't very senior. We can't necessarily go and change all the processes at our company. We have to work with what we have. And how do you adapt and make that work? That's a lot of what my coaching is about.
So you're right. I met a lot of product managers. Some are extremely senior, build some world-class things, and then others are just basically lending a job. And as a job, they don't really know how to run products in the way that you would if you own the entire thing. So essentially, you're like the man in the middle, stuck between both worlds, susceptible to following somebody else's roadmap, not actually creating their own, and then really just become managers of the team from the product side. So I think that entire experience is overwhelming for some folks.
I think so. And rightly, it's a lot. It's a huge shift, and it's a lot of responsibility. And there's resources out there, but it takes time. And coaching is a great way to fast track that and address the painful issues you have today. How do we resolve releases going? It's surprising me some of the things that come up in conversation. So I've talked to product managers who had the complaint, my releases, they're like 4 weeks late.
Oh, wow.
4 weeks late. I'm like, wait, what? 4 weeks? Yeah, we closed the sprint 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, and we're just doing the release now. And so these are the types of like real world problems I'm seeing. These people, need a lot of help in terms of how to deal with that. How do you fix that? There's a lot of things you have to fix that. It's not just our sprint is late. It's not just our release is late. It's way more complicated.
Yeah. People have a tendency to forget that it's not about sprints, it's just development work. But then there's a lot of additional activity that goes into releases. You got to work with marketing. You got to push some content out. You got to configure feature flags. You got to get things deployed. You want to do any kind of configurations or settings, or you want to release in small controllable increments so you can be sure that when it goes to the masses, it's fully ready. There's lots of other things, and nothing happens at the sprint's end, sort of the done factor.
It's not done. You might be running experiments too, right? So you may be during the sprint, you developed an experiment and you're running that. And at some point you need to turn that on. You need to analyze the data. Yeah, it doesn't end when the sprint ends. And so I do a lot of the getting back to basics and looking at these sorts of things with people. And this is a lot of what I write about, as well as I think sometimes you've got a lot of very opinionated people in the product space that talk about some of the higher level concepts of what we're doing. But I felt like there was not enough people talking about the day-to-day of like, how do you run a retro? How do you close out a sprint? These sorts of things.
So is product involved in the retro?
I think it can be. I think this is, again, there's lots of opinions on how this can be done. I've definitely been involved in retros. I find it very helpful as the product person who often, in a lot of cases, is also the product ops person who's managing our processes and pipelines, to be involved in the retro and understand how is the team dealing with QA? How is the team dealing with releases? What kind of challenges are we having? It can be really helpful.
Do you actually participate in the retro, or do you wait until the retro is done, the top 3 action items are selected, and you go in, take a look at all the cards that were pulled up, get a summary overview from the team, and get to ask a question? Because that's not really the quote unquote agile process that most people teach, but it's an element that you can use occasionally if you want to get closer to the team.
It depends on where the team's at. Sometimes you get handed a new team. I might be on that first retro with the new team because I want to get some insights. I want to see what's happening. Maybe the team's having an issue. I'd love to lead that retro if there's issues happening in the process or in the pipeline, because I want to be able to suss out what the problems are. And there's different templates and formats you can use for a retro. And I think if you're really good at leading a retro, you can guide that conversation and you can get to the bottom of some of the problems and get people to talk openly and honestly about what's happening and actually solve some of the issues. So retros are a great tool. I don't sit on every retro because it's usually, I just don't have time. But when I need to, I'm there, and it's a great tool.
The reason I ask is, by the book, managers should never be in a retro, and I find this a little bogus. I think that's a lot of insight that's missed. And if you have an environment where the team frowns upon the leaders being in the meeting, I'm like, there's something wrong with that picture.
I think, it depends on the environment, right? And the culture that you've created. I don't know, depending on the company, I don't know that I'd want like the CEO or the director there, but your product manager who's part of the team and who's working with them every day, planning and strategizing. And I think that person ideally can be involved. I wouldn't leave them out.
So let's imagine you did have a chance to have a CEO in that meeting. Why not?
I think you can. I think the meeting is going to go differently. Right. It's going to be, people might be a little bit more reserved, and it depends on that relationship too. Right. Like the CEO, if the CEO is the type of person that you never really see anywhere except for your quarterly town halls, then people might be a little bit more reserved around them. But if they're more actively involved, then it's going to be a different outcome.
Yeah. But I'm actually like, so maybe that's a little bit of experience coming in, but over the years, I stopped being scared speaking with folks in higher echelons of the leadership. And I've actually found that a lot of them, they don't know about the problems we're dealing with. They don't know about our struggles, or they're so much elevated above it that they really don't have a close ear to the ground. And participating in that level, they can have a real unadulterated view of what the teams are going through. And they are the ultimate veto, meaning they can make those changes really rapidly by connecting and addressing the problems. I mean, one of the TV series I used to enjoy watching was the CEO Undercover, where CEO.
Oh, yes.
I found that to be priceless. Really, just experiencing what your employees go through is amazing. Obviously, not everybody has that mindset because obviously everybody's different. But if you can put it together, it can be priceless.
Yeah, I think so. And CEO Undercover, nobody knows that they're the CEO, ideally. And so they speak a little bit more openly. So I think it's about fostering that type of community where you can have these open conversations and people aren't afraid to be judged for what they have to say. And I think as long as you're not defensive as a leader and you come in open-minded and you might have to bite your tongue and maybe this is not really an issue. Why are we talking about this? But you really need to be either there just as an observer, or if you're there as a facilitator, make sure it's not about you and it's about the group and really listening to what they have to say. Sometimes they might nitpick things that really shouldn't be problems, right? We see this in retros. Sometimes there's things that people are nitpicking or fussing over that really, it's like, guys, like this really isn't a problem. Pick a direction and go, let's just do something here. But sometimes they just need somebody to tell them that though too. So
yeah, venting is important. You give the team the voice, and then wherever that leads is good enough. It could become an action item that everybody tackles, or it can just become something that you vent. You realize, yes, it's something where we don't really have a solution, but it's something we have to monitor, or something we have to observe, and maybe over time we'll come up with something.
that's true. Sometimes issues come up multiple times in multiple retros before you get to the point where either it's painful enough we want to do something about it, or we've thought enough about this that we actually have a solution now. Yeah.
Yeah. So you speak with a lot of people, and I'm curious, what is the kind of like the number one questions that people ask?
Generalizing a little bit, like one of the biggest things that people seem to want to know is how do you do product properly? Am I doing this right?
That's a big
Like the most
question,
common
right?
question. Am I doing this right? And the answer is always, it depends. And right. So I think there's lots of differing opinions. I like to try to work with people where they're at and work with them within their companies. And so I deal with a lot of product managers, like maybe director level, but mostly senior, junior product managers who don't have a lot of control over things. And maybe they're still early in their role at that company or early experience, and they don't have a lot of influence yet. And so it's a lot of working within what you have to work with, right? What are the tools that you have at your disposal at your current company with your current team? What kind of things can you introduce without rocking the boat too much? And the question I think I get asked the most is, am I doing this right? Is this the right way? I want to do product management right. And so I think people come into it with, it's a good mindset to have. I want to make sure I'm doing this the right way. I don't want to do it wrong. The challenging thing is it might be, maybe what you're doing is not by the book. It's maybe a little bit unorthodox, but you do what you got to do to make it work. And as long as you can make it work, then I think you're doing good.
That's very interesting that you say that, because you read LinkedIn and the sentiment is absolutely different. It's like product management is going away. It's done. You won't get a job. And people can't be more confused about what is it that I have to do, or the actual workload on the product manager has been the heaviest it's ever been, because product managers are expected to do everything, know the customer,
Pick up all the
in the
pieces.
product, innovate, run tests, speak with everybody, have control over support, set up teams, provide roadmaps, recommendations, run team sprints, do a little bit of testing, participate in training. And I'm just covering like the first quick things off the top of my mind.
There's so much. And depending on where you're working, you'll have a different mix of those things. And maybe you don't have a product owner working with you. So now you're doing, sometimes that's a distinct role, right? So now you're doing that. Maybe you don't have a scrum master, so you're taking over those responsibilities. Maybe you are the most senior person in terms of strategy, so you're doing that. Maybe you don't have QA analysts or QA people, so you're doing the QA. I was at a company, I was managing the releases. I was pushing the releases through GitHub and doing that and versioning them and writing the release notes. So you never know. Yeah, it's generally whatever the company needs, right? Whatever the team needs, that's what you end up doing, and it could be anything. So yeah, there's not a one size fits all answer. And we have this, like sometimes LinkedIn, we have this like perfect idea of what product management needs to be. Some people think it doesn't need to be there at all, but there is a lot of things that we do. There's a lot of, they say the glue that kind of holds things together. And it's interesting when you look at a lot of product manager backgrounds, and I don't know as much about yourself, but like I come from a very dynamic background. I worked in agencies. I did design work. I was a developer. I did account management at one point. I've done QA. I've done support and success roles. And so those are the kinds of things that product managers do all the time. And so it's good to have that diverse background. And I've been spending a lot of time over the years getting more into data as well, because I find data analysis, some companies don't have big data teams and you have to do a lot of that yourself.
Yeah,
So
so some
it's
people don't know how their users are even using their tooling. Yeah. Or implementing features that push users away from the platform. I find that to be like one of the big mistakes. Like it would usually come in the form of some kind of corporate promise. Hey, our old solution used to do this, so we got to do this in the new solution. But you don't realize that you're just pushing all your users outside of the platform, especially with data products.
yeah, replatforming when you don't need to. Maybe you just need to pivot what you already have. I think that's interesting because that comes from a business point of view, but as well as an engineering point of view, right? Engineers, having done a lot of development work, it's like sometimes it's easier just to nuke and paint, right? Just start over. Just let's build version 2.0 of the product. But that can be very jarring for users.
The analogy I give is imagine car racing. So you have a slower car, but it's much, much farther ahead. And you have to play catch up. And your car, it keeps falling apart very quickly. So you're picking up pieces and stuff as you go, right? Still trying to catch up, because at some point you got to disassemble, put in a different engine, in, different tires. So you keep on stop and go. It's challenging, especially if you do have a lot of users, and you got to be careful with the experience a little bit. So this creates multi-year roadmaps, and they're extremely tough to execute on.
They are. And as a product manager, and I talk to some people who are in this situation, I've been there myself, managing these types of migrations. Am I really even doing product at this point? I'm a program manager. I'm a project manager. I'm just managing this 2-year project and making sure it doesn't fall off the rails and that we hit our deliverables. And I coach people too that are in that scenario, and try to work with them to think about, yeah, okay, the roadmap's done, but there's still an opportunity to have product input here. And we can still direct the course of the development of this over time. There's things that people didn't think of that you're running into 1 year into the project that were not even, considered. And there's opportunities to pivot and update the roadmap as well. Roadmap is a living, breathing thing. That 2-year roadmap, probably 1 month in, is very out of date at that point already. Working with product managers in those situations as well is always interesting.
Agreed. So interesting question for you. What separates a good product manager from a bad product manager?
I don't know that it's one particular thing. I just wrote a post about this. I think some product managers, I myself included, can be very self-critical. I look at things I've done, I'm like, especially in this climate, right? When everything is going and you're hitting your metrics and the growth is off the charts, it's really good to feel good about what you're doing, especially as a product manager. It's great. We did it. We launched that. It was adopted. Everybody liked it. It went really well. In the current economic climate, especially for a lot of companies, things are not going well. And it doesn't seem to matter what you do. Sometimes things are still not going well. And so then you start to introspect and think, am I a bad product manager? Am I bad at what I'm doing? Or are these forces outside of my control? Or is this because of something I did? And so I think if you are doing that kind of self-reflection and you're asking the questions, am I a bad product manager? How do I be better? Then you're probably on the right track. You probably are a good product manager because you're actually thinking about these things. I think product managers generally, and I'm generalizing here, I don't think about those things, are maybe pushing forward with, no, I've got a plan. I know what I'm doing. I've got this all figured out. Don't tell me what to do. We've got this figured out. I have a plan. If we just do this, if you just do what I tell you to do, we're going to make it, and this is going to survive. I think good product managers are saying, I don't know what to do, especially in this situation, in this climate. Let's work on this together as a team and figure this out and figure out what we need to do to get back on course.
Yeah, I think making the right decisions is extremely difficult as a product manager, right? So let's imagine you're pushing a feature that's not getting you the adoption that you anticipated. The fact that you pushed for that feature and were hoping that you were going to get that traction through that feature doesn't really make you good or bad. It's just an assumption that you've made. So if things don't go according to plan, you're always second guessing yourself, and you're like, did I make a stupid decision? Right? Why did I commit the team to doing this? I thought I had good indicators, but we never actually, as product people, we know the future. We don't. We have no idea. We are making assumptions with the data that we have. And sometimes we're at the mercy of the environment, the timing, and a lot of different things. Look at all these AI startups right now. They're growing and they're integrating their workflows, and they're committing themselves to specific solution sets and tooling. And then
Yeah.
tomorrow, whatever the libraries or whatever the LLMs that they depend on, they get scraped for something better and shut down. What are they going to do? So sometimes you're at the mercy of whatever the ecosystem you're plugging yourself into, or the users,
And
or technology. So it's tough to tell.
I think it's important to highlight the unknowns and the uncertainty, and it's good to take risk. I've definitely gone with my gut sometimes because you just don't have the data. I think it's good to call that out when you're doing that too, and let people know, hey, this might not work. And I think like you're right. We do as product managers, if we're doing a good job, we probably are failing a lot. There's a lot of things that we try that don't work. If you're playing it safe and you're only trying things because it's 95% certainty that they're going to work, then there's probably a lot more you could be doing, right? You're playing it too safe. Depending on what you're doing. If you're going to build a nuclear reactor, please play it safe. Let's not reinvent how that works. But if you're on the cutting edge and you're building a fusion reactor or something, then okay, yeah, maybe let's try some things that might not work as long as we follow safety protocols. We don't know what's going to work. And so a lot of what we're doing, like you said, like working with LLMs and these different models, I don't know which one's going to be popular tomorrow. So let's account for that and let's build some risk factor in there, and maybe we use something that's a little bit more flexible, so we can pick a different LLM if we need to and consider those risks. And that's part of our job, right? To consider those risks. But also let's not let that hold us back and prevent us from picking something. We need to, move forward, and we need to be okay with some level of risk.
Thank you for that. Obviously, we lifted the veil a little bit in the AI talk. So I have to ask the question, do you apply AI in any of your workflows, and where? What do you think, where do you think does it actually add value, and where gives you a little bit of an enhancement, but possibly not a
I
fit?
think I still have some trust issues with AI around certain things, right? So there's certain things I'm not going to just blindly let it do. Use AI quite a bit at my company and even in my teams. So we're doing AI content generation on landing pages. There's a lot of review involved if you're letting it generate a lot of content. If you feed it specific data and you let it generate a little bit of content, then you can have a little bit more confidence that it's going to behave a little bit better and not imagine things as much and get too creative. And so you can play within the parameters, and then that and what the risk level is, I'm okay with letting that stuff go out without really having a lot of review. So one of the challenges we run into and one of the bottlenecks is the review side of it. So if I'm having AI generate large amounts of content for landing pages, my job, then somebody needs to spend some time looking at those and making sure that they're okay. If it's a little bit of content, then it's fine. I use AI constantly. And I think this is somewhere that product managers in particular can really benefit. You're often being asked to do things that you're not an expert in. So let's say data analysis, right? That's one of those things. Maybe you're new to that and you're having to write SQL and your SQL is not the greatest. Let AI do that for you. There's very little risk there. Tell it what you want the query to do, give it the headings of the columns, and just ask it to write you the query. And copy, paste that into BigQuery or whatever tool you're using, and there you go, you've got your data. So I think there's a lot of things like that where, as a product manager who is multidisciplined and wearing many hats, like you can have it fill in some of the gaps where maybe you don't know. I don't know that I would let it run strategy for me. I probably want to be very involved in that process. But a lot of these types of tasks that previously took a lot of time, like I just did this recently, even if you know how to do it. So my SQL is okay. I can write a lot of it off the top of my head. I had to take a JSON object that was in a table, and I had to expand it out in my query and get them as separate fields. Just write, like there was like 20 different fields. Well, just to write that, so I just pasted it into GPT and I said, just make it for me, and it did it. I copied and pasted it. It took 2 seconds instead of 2 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. Use it for outside of pipeline. And then there's a lot of internal things that for used it for rising and ticket requests and these sorts of things as well, and to triage and help us manage our work day to day. I think it's really good at that. I'm really curious to see where it goes. I think as the models, and I see this all the time, the models improve, they get better. My trust level goes up. maybe that's its own, has its risks, but we take risks as product managers. And I think it's gonna be really interesting to see what it does. I use it in programming as well. Do a little bit of programming or little projects. I built an API recently for my query to get some data. It was really good for that. Claude, a lot of these tools can really help you. And again, like, even if you know how to do it, it's just faster. It can write an entire model in 2 seconds that might take me 5 minutes to code by hand. So I think there's a lot of like performance improvement, speed improvements.
But what about the product side of things? Because these are one-off tasks that occasionally you need to do, and you don't want to pull the team away from it.
Yeah.
So you want to accelerate, and you don't want to depend on anybody else's availability, because obviously anybody that you pull in, they have other priorities. So you're distracting them from the ultimate goal. I get that. We want to be self-sustaining. But what about things like managing the roadmap prioritization or anything else? Because I find that we tend to want to apply AI in places where it makes zero sense. For example, that same thing, roadmap prioritization. Why would AI tell me how to prioritize it properly? Just certain things that people claim as a good solution, but I can't see the entire future of the product be controlled by AI, no matter how many agents they have and how they want to argue with each other. But it's very tough. Ultimately, it's those instincts and gut feel of the product manager that are essentially of value. And I think that's what creates really good product managers. They have the experience to have those instincts that are more likely than not to produce better results.
There's a lot of promises that AI seems to bring with it. And I think a lot of those are false promises. I agree. I don't think it's going to be managing our roadmap for us. I don't think you can just build a company with a whole bunch of agents talking to each other and have that work long term. You're going to run into issues really quickly. I think it's Levels IO on Twitter X. He was talking about, oh, I built this game. Here's this game I built with AI. It's great. Okay. And then he went to add networking to it, and multiplayer fell apart instantly. So even as AI becomes more advanced, like at a certain point, and I've had this issue with Cursor, I tell it to change one thing, it changes 10 things. And now I'm like fighting with it. So no, I just want you to change this one line. I just want you to write this one function. And then it wants to change a bunch of things. And so I think that's always going to be an issue. I think the things where it can help is those types of tasks that take a long time, that you know what you want to do, you can describe it really well, you can give it a really good prompt, and it can execute on it, and then you can review. I think you can have it help you, right? Like PRDs and things like that. You can give it like, here's like the basis of what I want to do. Can you flesh this out? Can you make it more detailed? I like to spar with it. I call it sparring. I ask it questions like, here's this thing I wrote. Am I missing something? Is there an angle I haven't considered? I like to use it as an assistant, but I wouldn't let it run my business. I do a lot of writing, obviously, with the newsletter. And so I'm a bit dyslexic and I struggle with some things there. So I use Grammarly all the time, but I'm constantly telling it, no, don't correct that. No, don't correct that. No, this is the way I want to say it. Stop trying to correct it. And it's gotten to the point now where I'm like, they keep adding more tools to it and more functionality. And now it'll rewrite things for you. And that's great, but it's almost getting in my way now. I just want it to correct my spelling and my punctuation and make sure my sentence structure is not backwards. That's it. I don't want it to rewrite and revoice what I'm trying to say in the tone and voice that I'm trying to say it in. And so I think sometimes we try to push too much onto the AI and the LLM, and
we give it too much.
We do. I don't have that much faith in it. I think it's a really useful tool, but it's a tool. At the end of the day, it's still a tool. And so you have to have some control over that. And you have to have some predictability around it. And you have to have some way to manage it, just like any other tool.
I couldn't agree with you more. There are things that I've applied in AI to just get over a little bit of the creativity block, to try to get something started, right? Like it's very hard to start off the clean slate. If you can even create some kind of an outline, very rough outline, give it to AI and go, how would I do X? And here we're using this outline. It helps you. I mean, you can also ask, hey, with this outline, anything else is missing? So I use it as a as a virtual person sitting next to me that I can ask questions. But I do have to always wonder, does that person have, quote unquote, virtual person? Does that person give me what I need? Because there were times when I sat with somebody that really had no idea about the topic, and I just really needed another pair of eyes.
Yeah.
Just to give you like a little bit, ask a question, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm making an assumption that somebody would know about these little things. So let me just elaborate a little bit more. Because when we
Mhm.
get really deep into something, it's very easy to just start changing that context so that anybody reading is in the unknown immediately. Like the
Mhm.
storytelling is critical.
I think that actually touches on one of the problems that I have with AI. It's a multi-tool, but it's like the multi-tool of multi-tools. So like by default, it can do anything. And essentially it is the fridge, toaster, dishwasher, laundry machine, car jack. It just does everything, right? I'm not a fan of multi-purpose tools generally. I find they're more likely to break. They're less useful in a lot of cases. I do a lot of like hands-on stuff around the house and things like this, right? Like I want a tool that does what it's supposed to do and does it well. And so one of the challenges that I think that I see a lot of people running into with AI is they're taking that multi-purpose tool that does everything and they're just using it. They're taking their wrapper off and they're using it. You need to prompt it. You need to sandbox it into a thing. And because otherwise it's not going to be as useful. And so that is one thing that I have learned. And so ChatGPT makes this really easy now. You can do projects. Used to be create a custom GPT. Now you can create a project, can have pre-prompting. In that project, you can now do all your queries. So like I have one that I created specifically for image generation. And I gave it all my pre-prompting about what I like images to look like for my blog posts. And now I can go in there and I can tell it, generate an image. But if you just go to an AI and say, generate an image of a frog on a post, who knows what you're going to get? You don't know. And so narrowing the scope is really helpful. And I think that's one of the ways that we can overcome the generalizationness of AI. Of it's just too much. You give it, you just want ideas and it rewrites the whole thing for you. And so you have to put some guardrails around it, just like you would with anything else. And I think that is an interesting problem that AI has as it becomes a tool that is very multi-purpose. That's just out there that anybody can use. Most people need it to do a very specific thing. And if you can get it to do a very specific thing, usually it's really good at it. But if you're just generally like asking it questions and not giving it any guidelines or guardrails to work within, then it's not going to be as helpful.
You worked with a lot of teams in a lot of different companies. You know how there's a conflicting relationship? Is it product that runs engineering? Is it engineering that runs product? How do you collaborate both of these different disciplines? What's your take on this?
Yeah. Every company is a little bit different. In some companies, I've had to lean into engineering a lot more and be like, guys, like you're the experts here. Give me something to work with here. I need a little bit more detail. I need some background. I need help making this decision from an engineering point of view. In other companies, engineering is a lot more vocal and a lot more controlling about the way things are getting done. And then you're pushing like, no, we have to think about the business and the strategy, and the dynamic is different everywhere. I think there is this balance. One of the trends I've noticed is I have a lot more engineers now than ever before asking, what does this mean for the business? What is the strategy behind this? Yes, I know you told us to build this thing, but why are we building it? So that's been really interesting to see that shift.
I think people are reading a lot more. I think the product has been a lot more vocal, and everybody in the Agile community have been more vocal to ask questions about why. And it's, as somebody who's been an engineer, that's something I always struggled with, because we would never get the accolades for things that we do, and we would sweat and work overtime for something. And a lot of times it ended up that it wasn't really worth the effort. So we were always questioning, why are we sacrificing so much? What is the purpose of this? And again, this was like a lot of things lost in interpretation. Guys, this is the most important thing and most important thing. We heard you, we're on it. But then we find out that it's an exaggerated description of what was needed. Maybe some customer asked for it. It wasn't as important, could have been lower priority. So we're constantly second guessing. And that's interesting that you have that observation that people are beginning to ask. I think alignment is critical, and connecting project goals with what the actual engineer is doing is extremely powerful from motivation perspective.
I agree. And that context is really important both ways. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish on the business side and the strategy side, there's different ways you can do that with engineering. We can be scrappy and we can build a quick prototype and we can test it and then see if we even want to build it. Or we can build the most robust solution we could think of that's PCI compliant, but maybe it doesn't need to be, right? And all these things. This is what drove me to product management. I was the engineer who kept saying, why are we building this? I just spent 6 weeks building this and it never launched. How do I get my time back? And so I really, oddly enough, I thought design was the answer. Because I didn't really know about product management. And I thought the designer is in the meetings before the work gets to me. So if I'm in those meetings with the planners and the business people at the design stage, maybe I can have enough influence to prevent us from making stuff and spending time building stuff we don't need to build. And then I found out that decisions were already made in a lot of cases by the time it got to design already too. And so that wasn't enough. And then I realized product management. Okay, so I can be the product manager and I can start to make the decisions there. I still struggle sometimes because sometimes the business is making the decisions before it even gets to the product manager. And the sales team says, well, we've already sold this. This is what we have to build. And so that can be a challenge. But
Yeah, I agree with you on the design thing. I actually found myself diving deeper into the design the more I started to work on products. And I've always had a
yeah,
knack for that. I enjoy doing it, but I find that I spend a lot more time on the strategic direction of a design, try to perfect the entire user experience. And then and only then do I get the teams involved to understand the scope of what we've defined as a solution. And then as it happens, I usually try to implement it in iterative way because we learn quickly that just because you develop the design, just because you have animations, just because you have different components that look good in a design, once you start actually using it, it's a completely different experience. So if you want to connect with the psychological factor of what the customer is going to feel or what the user is going to experience, you really have to take it through all the steps and critique it on your own. That I actually find that I spend more time on that than supervising implementation. For example, implementation is a little bit easier. People do bubble up questions that you didn't think of all the time, but not as much as iterating through the design when you actually have it.
the other thing to consider, and I think I agree, design is a good place to spend a lot of time. If you've ever done any 3D printing, this is like a lot of people are getting 3D printers these days. I used to do like a lot of CNC computer controlled milling back in the day. And if you're just like building stuff in general, you can spend a lot of time doing design. And I've done it in 3D CAD software and designing the perfect thing. And then you print it. If you look at anybody, you watch any YouTube video with anybody who's doing 3D printing, stacks and stacks of, I designed it in the 3D software and then I printed it, but I didn't account for the shrinkage of the material and now it doesn't fit and it's too small, right? And so then I had to go back to the drawing board and I had to print a bunch of iterative prototypes and test different sizes and see how different materials respond. And then you end up with 20 different versions of the thing before you finally get there. And I think this is printing also suffers from this like false promise of you can design a thing, you can push the button and print it, and now you have the thing. And it's cheaper than going out and buying the thing. Not if you have to go print the thing 20 times and each print takes 10 hours and you have to go back and redesign. And so this is a lot of what we do, right? There's a lot of like, even the designing, there's certain things you're not going to figure out, like you said, until you actually build an iteration and get it out in front of customers and get their feedback and see them use it. And then you realize, okay, like on paper, when I designed it, this made sense. We didn't consider ABC about what we were building, or the customer has a different opinion or a different experience than we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had this argument the other day and I said, user-centric design is the modern waterfall because you would spend a lot of time on pre-designing the workflows from the user experience angle, and then you would hand it off to development to implement. And most people just don't see that entire interaction with UI UX teams because the development teams are generally disconnected from anything that the product is doing strategically. So we're doing our prototyping, we're doing our UI UX, we're trying to problem solve outside of the development for as long as possible to avoid distractions, to let them concentrate on what they're working on, and also to have a plan for the future, right? And people usually don't see that. So unless you actually do work as a product manager and you're connecting with all the other components, the product marketing, the design, all of those other pieces, the engineering teams are typically disconnected from something like that. So I think it's always a good idea to try to describe, hey, when we're implementing, this isn't just what we're doing. And by the way, in the future, we're working on this. But alignment is one of those difficult things to have across the org, especially if the teams get large.
Yeah, it is. And the larger things get, the more disconnected they can get. And yeah, even understanding, do we have the capability to market this thing the way we need to market it to get the engagement that we need to make it worthwhile? And you have every different parts of the company seem to move at different speeds. And so this is something that I'm struggling with right now is we do a lot of email marketing, but our ability to target and segment users is very limited, way beyond what you would think that it should be. And so we're working really hard to improve that so that can get back up to speed with our product, we can we can be a lot more specific about how we target users. We have a lot of information in the product, but that information doesn't exist in our marketing. Making sure that everybody's moving forward at the same speed, I think is really important as well. And making sure that you're aware of those limitations before you go build the thing. Yeah. It's important.
So what would be your top recommendation to anyone in the product management space from who's trying to get a more solid ground and better experience and improve their craft? What would be something that you'd tell them?
I do a lot of like very bespoke coaching with people, and everybody's got slightly different problems. What is the biggest problem you have right now, and how can you improve that? So it has to be impactful too. So if it's a bottleneck in a process, if it's a product problem, a product market fit issue, or what is the biggest issue you have that you are in control of or have any influence over? And I would focus as much as you can on that problem right now. I find it could be really overwhelming as a product manager. And I see people get and I'm guilty of this myself. It's really hard to stay focused. You get very scatterbrained. You get pulled in a lot of different directions. Sometimes you have to let these other fires burn and you need to focus on one thing. So I think when you're focusing on one thing and you're spending a lot of time trying to solve that one problem, then you can get deep into that problem. One of the challenges I think I see people, one of the things I see people struggling with is that they don't go deep enough on something. So they have this problem. I have no idea how to solve it. Looked up any ideas of how to solve it? Have you asked ChatGPT how to solve it? Have you tried to solve it? No, it's just this problem that's there. Okay, we have to explore this. We have to talk about it. Let's open it up. Let's look into the problem. Let's figure out what it is and diagnose it and find a solution, right? And so I think there's lots of things that we just don't take the time to look into in enough detail. I like to go deep on things. It's a challenge as a product manager. Like I said, we get pulled in a lot of directions, but I know when I can go deep on something, I can figure it out and I can come up with a solution or I can diagnose the problem. And so I think it's just taking the time, being aware of that, and then carving out the time in your schedule to, I'm going to take 4 hours and I'm going to look at this thing. And we're going to figure it out once and for all, solve it, and then we're going to move on.
Reminds me of the athlete's purposeful practice, right? You want to do this purposefully, not just, hey, this problem exists and I'm just going to mellow over it whenever, but actually try to concentrate on the problem and be like, okay, here's my approach to solving this. And here's what I know. Here's what I don't. Let me find out and figure things out.
A few weeks ago, I did a post on how to learn anything. And then that's the premise of it. Purposeful, intentional practice. That's how you do it. And so, yeah, that's what you need to do. And I think if you can do that and you can solve that one problem and then move on to the next thing, now you're building your knowledge, you're building your skill set, you know how to solve that problem now. And then you move on to the next one. And there's always something new. And I'm like, even now I'm finding myself in situations where I'm like, I've never been in this situation before. I don't know how to solve this problem, but I know if I spend some time with it and work with it and open it up and intentionally learn and intentionally look at the problem, then we can figure something out.
Very cool. Steedan, awesome conversation. Guys, if you want to learn from Steedan, get a hold of him. He's available. Steedan, how do folks find you if they have questions?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is the newsletter. It's a Substack. It's roadmapweekly.com. It's nice and easy. And I'm on most of the socials as Steedan Crowe, Steedan, and then Crowe with an E. So you can find me on X. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't post as much there. So if you want to see my content, the newsletter is usually the best way.
Should roadmaps really be run weekly?
Pardon me? They'd be run weekly. I don't. Should they be run weekly? I think they should be revisited. Some versions of roadmaps should be revisited weekly. It's around the concept. It's around the idea that roadmaps are organic, living things, right? You can't build a roadmap and then look at it 6 months later. I don't know that you need to write a weekly roadmap. I do for my week. I actually do like a weekly schedule and a weekly roadmap for my week. But yeah, my first series was about road mapping and this living document. So roadmap weekly. That's what it is. That's what whether or not you should do a roadmap weekly, I think that might be a little expensive.
Nice. Guys, I'm going to share all of these links in the description. So you'll have access to it along with Steedan's contact information on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, if you have questions, I know Steedan has got a tremendous amount of knowledge. I'm sure he would be able to help you brainstorm anything, any problem area that you are struggling with. So Steedan, again, thanks for joining. This was awesome. Always enjoy these conversations. And again, thanks for connecting.
Yeah, great chatting with you, Alex.